Jamaica, make we do the right thing. Make we live good today for a better tomorrow. Talk it out. Don't fight it out. The time by the Ministry of National Security is
6:30.
Good evening, it's Monday, September 29, 2025. It's the last Monday in September. Now, this morning, the opposition, PNP, named its shadow cabinet. We'll be getting reactions to that lineup of spokespersons and also hearing directly from one of the deputy spokesmen in Senator Cleveland Tomlinson. He's the deputy spokesperson on productivity, efficiency and competitiveness. What does that even mean? We'll hear from him a little later on in the program. Now, we'll also be hearing from political commentators Andrew McDaniel. He'll be joining us shortly, and Decardiago Nelson, who is the Deputy Programs Manager at the Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment. He's also the President of UTEC's Debating and Public Speaking Society. Mr. Nelson, let me just start by firstly asking, did I pronounce your first name correctly? I've asked you about 3 times since day.
It's close. It's Decardiago, but at this point, I'll take it for whatever it is. But it's very close.
Decardiago, your reaction to the shadow cabinet named this morning, your initial reaction to what you've seen?
So I think a 36-member shadow cabinet, 26 with portfolios and 27 portfolios, 9 deputies. I think that's a bold move. But the significance of it lies not within the number in and of itself, but in how those roles will be activated. I think the timing for them is strategic because it sends a message that the opposition intends to remain institutionally ready and proactive, rather than disbanding itself into a defeatist kind of silence. But ultimately, that kind of statement will be judged by the execution of this 36-member shadow cabinet.
You mentioned that it's a bold move. Why do you say that? What about it for you is bold?
Well, firstly, when I heard 36, I was like, that's a big number compared to the government's 22, 18 ministers, 13 state, and a permanent secretary. I think comparatively, it's a bold move. But I think coming from what I've heard in the election and the 4 pillars that they would have focused on, and looking at some of the roles, even, I think the stuff that they want to cover in terms of the different aspects of their shadow cabinet, I think that is a significant step. So I'm just really waiting to see how it is that they will execute those portfolios, the messaging that they'll send, and the general debates that we expect to see in Parliament.
Yeah, you mentioned the 4 pillars of their list here, and it's the economic development. They have a set of spokespersons focusing on economic development, then a set focusing on human development, then physical development, and then governance. Now, joining us now is political commentator Andrew McDaniel, and I just want to get his reaction. So even just how the PNP, they have segmented their shadow cabinet here. Your thoughts on this approach, Mr. McDaniel?
Hi, so good evening, guys, and good evening to your viewers too as well. So my initial reaction was that the PNP has done something that they've traditionally done, in the sense of the shadow cabinet is not a true mirror of the cabinet selected by the government. Some of the functional areas assigned by leader of opposition, Mark Golding, they've added on, let me say, different dimensions to the different portfolios. So even if you look at portfolios like education, there is no focus on early childhood development, or early childhood education and development too as well. So what the PNP is doing is that, and I noted that.
And I should just say for my viewers as well that the person who is shadowing that portfolio is Damian Crawford, and his deputy is Dr. Maziki Thame from the University of the West Indies. And for our viewers, we will be going through that list in detail. You may pick up your point, Mr. McDaniel.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that based on the comment made earlier about the size, now the size is to be expected. The PNP has a larger number in Parliament currently than what they had before. And one of the biggest issues that they faced in the last term was that some of the major spokespersons in the party, they never had any real parliamentary power or voice, an official voice in parliament, so they never had a seat, nor did they have a Senate position for some of them, like Dr. Alfred does. So when you look at the shadow cabinet presents what would have been picture for the PNP's cabinet if they were to form government. Some of the names that we're seeing are names that you would have expected to have formed cabinet at the time. Some of the interesting selections I realize is that...
One second, Andrew McDaniel, before you go into the interesting selections, we do have to take an interesting break right now to pay some bills. We'll be right back here on Lead Story on CVM TV. We're talking about the opposition's shadow cabinet that was named earlier this morning. Stay with us.
To take flight. It's Aviation Expo 2025 in collaboration with the Airports Authority of Jamaica and the Jamaica Civil Aviation Authority, the island's ultimate aviation showcase and family fun day. Join us Saturday, October 4 from 12 to 8 p.m. at Tinson Penn Aerodrome in Kingston with show host Ian I.T. Ellis. And guess what? It's free. Plus, the JCAA and JDF will be recruiting. Follow at Aviation Expo JA for updates.
Finals on CVM, you know.
But mums, you can't watch it on CVM website, man.
Score!
Greatness begins here.
Hey everybody, I'm Yendi, and this is Odyssey with Yendi. In this space, we connect with some of your favorite people as they share their journeys. Here we have some unfiltered conversations as we deep dive into their inspirations, motivations, and experiences to inspire our own life journey.
Odyssey with Yendi, brought to you by Grace, Singer, and IslandNet Services.
Welcome back to Lead Story here on CVM TV. We're talking the PNP's shadow cabinet that was named today. We're talking with Andrew McDaniel, political commentator, and Diego Nelson from the University of the West Indies Debating and Public Speaking Society. Now, before we go into hearing about the bold moves and the interesting names in the shadow cabinet, just exactly what is the shadow cabinet and who makes up the shadow cabinet? Here is Carla Ramdeen with this overview.
PNP President Mark Golding retains responsibility for defense and constitutional affairs, while Julian Robinson will lead on finance and the public service, supported by Senators Ramon Ferguson and Lambert Brown. Peter Bunting takes on productivity, efficiency and competitiveness, with Senator Cleveland Tomlinson as deputy spokesperson. Dr. Dayton Campbell continues to shadow agriculture, fisheries and food security. In human development, Dr. Angela Brown-Burke will oversee social protection, while Damian Crawford takes charge of education and early child development. Dr. Alfred Dawes is tasked with health and wellness, and Wavell Hines with the labor and sports. Denise Daly, gender, the elderly and persons with disabilities, and Kenneth Russell for rural and community development. Luthen Cousins will handle land, settlements and titling. Dennis Gordon, urban renewal and redevelopment. Mikhail Phillips will oversee transport and mining. Ian Hales will focus on water and special transport, and Omar Newell will focus on environment and climate resilience. Richard Azan will cover road and works, and Senator Floyd Morris will be responsible for housing and sustainable living. Governance responsibilities are also spread across the team, with Senator Donna Scott Motley covering for foreign affairs, Fitz Jackson on national security, and Natalie Nita Garvey on local government and participatory democracy. Zulika Jess will cover justice and Aisat Buchanan for youth and human rights. The shadow cabinet will focus on 4 key areas: economic growth, human development, physical development, and governance. Social commentator Sandra Roden says there are some notable surprises.
There's a switch from national security, which of course Peter Bunting was Minister of National Security, was spokesperson on national security. Now it's Fitz Jackson that wears the hat of national security, which is interesting. For tourism and linkages, this one is quite interesting as well, because it's Andrea Perkis that takes on that role of spokesperson for tourism and linkages. I don't know much of her in that space. Probably there's more to learn as it relates to her own expertise and what she brings to the table. Of course, we see Zulika Jess coming in as spokesperson for justice, and that's an interesting addition as well.
He says the opposition leader's portfolio of constitutional affairs is interesting.
He takes on defense and constitutional affairs, which is interesting, which means that we should expect to see more of the leader of the opposition in relation to that conversation of constitutional affairs. You know, he has some perspectives as it relates to what we should do and how we should do it all at once, particularly in relation to our final court. Of course, there is a bit of an impasse there from both sides when it comes on to that key area of constitutional reform.
Political commentator Floyd B. Smith sees the shadow cabinet as experimental, adding that it seems to be more focused on giving as many members of parliament some experience in governmental affairs, which he says poses some concerns.
I see where a number of newly named portfolios have been added. And this begs the question as to whether or not, if the PNP should form a future government, would it go the same route as the JLP in packing the executive with so many members of parliament who, in my estimation, should be out there focusing more on representational politics.
All right, thank you so much for that, Carla Ramdeen. So you are making a point about some of what you thought was interesting, and I noted that Carla spoke about some of that. Andrew McDaniel, Fitz Jackson taking over security from Peter Bunting, constitutional affairs, by the opposition leader himself, Mark Golding. Donna Scott Motley was the spokesperson, speaking about that under her justice portfolio that she shadowed last time round. Some of these are, I imagine, are some of the interesting changes you're speaking of.
Yes, certainly. But the leader of the opposition taking on the portfolio was not even taking on, basically making it his primary focus aside from defense. In terms of taking on constitutional affairs, it's not so much something that's new. I mean, he has been a central voice in the whole debate about constitutional affairs, the constitutional reform process in the country. And one of the major agendas for the major topics on the agenda for the government for this current term and Jonas administration is constitutional reform and progressing that from where it is currently, which is currently a stalemate between both parties in terms of trying to remove the monarch as the head of state. Now, the leader of the opposition has been very clear on some of his non-negotiables in terms of the final appellate court. He has been a central voice in that debate, and I believe he's just now positioned himself in parliament, in government, as the person who's going to take lead on that debate. Now, the interesting selection I wanted to highlight was more so Senator Donna Scott Motley, and she would have had that position before in terms of debating as the lead person on constitutional reform. But she's now focused on foreign affairs, and more importantly, I want to identify diaspora affairs. Now, the PNP has been pushing this thing where the diaspora should be represented in our parliament, and it has received some criticism in the sense of, do we want persons who don't reside in the country to be represented in the parliament? But now they're given a special portfolio for themselves in terms of having a voice in our government. So that's quite interesting to me. It's also new. I want to see exactly what materialize in terms of what will happen for Donna Scott Motley in terms of how she presents a voice of persons in the diaspora in our government, and what type of issues she will bring to the parliament in terms of the issues faced by persons in the diaspora, and how can we now link that to our domestic politics.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that for you, Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, I think I generally agree with what was said by all individuals earlier, but I'd just like to point out with the exception of Peter Bunting switching from national security into productivity and competitiveness, my focus really was on the youth perspective. Them naming Isaac Buchanan for youth and human rights, his government counterpart, of course, being Senator Dana Morris Dixon and Delroy Chucks for the human rights component. Now, as somebody who I've seen during the campaign trail being very interactive with young persons, I'm very curious to see what he'll bring to Parliament in terms of his contributions and matters relating to youth development, the whole human rights aspects. Not really my fray, but more so looking on how he'll contribute to the youth arm in that conversation, as well as him working with education, Damon Crawford, in terms of education, the early childhood development part, specifically in terms of things like nutrition policies, youth policies in terms of getting more youth engagement, engaging the youths a bit more. That's something I'm looking forward to see.
For you, just sticking on that, the fact that you don't have a spokesman directly countering Senator Dana Morris Dixon as education, youth, information, does that raise any issue for you?
It does not necessarily. I think Senator Dana Morris Dixon does has a counterpart, Isaac Buchanan and to some extent Damon Crawford, where education is concerned. I think that balance between the two should be sufficient. Obviously, though, I'm waiting to see how that would actually look like in the parliamentary year. But I think for now, having these two persons within these two specific portfolios should be sufficient.
I want to come back to you on this, Andrew McDaniel. Clyde Williams, noted political commentator and attorney at law, he said that the PNP's lineup of spokespersons and how they have divided their roles is conceptually flawed because they don't have that like for like, if you will. Do you agree with that viewpoint? Or your thoughts on that? The fact you don't necessarily have the like for like, with the exception of perhaps someone like Alfred Dawes, for example, or a few of the others. They're largely mixed and tweaked a bit from the PNP. Andrew McDaniel?
Yeah, so I understand, and it was one of the things I pointed out earlier is that the PNP shadow cabinet is not the perfect mirror of the government's cabinet. But what I want to point out is that I'm not totally against not creating a perfect mirror. Why? Because the opposition's mandate is not going to be the same as government mandates, which means there are some elements of our politics that the opposition will try to enter into the conversation. So when I think about things like the diaspora affairs, things like sustainable living adding on to housing. So all these different portfolios, these are we call now additional or sub-portfolios added on to the main government ministries that we know of. So when I think about things like education, even though you have the portfolio of education, it's still important that you focus on early childhood development. Now, the government mandate, the main mandate of education portfolio might be youth, skills, and information. But the opposition is now letting you know that one of our focus will now be on early childhood development. So whereas the government will focus on skills training, information, and just generally managing the education sector, the opposition is letting you know that one of the main focus should also be on early childhood development. So what it does is that it adds a new dimension to already existing government portfolio. Now, you could make the case that conceptually it's flawed because it does not give a direct opposition to the different cabinet ministries that currently exist. But at the same time, what it does, it adds new issues, or it adds opposing issues to the cabinet ministries. It forces them now to address some of these areas that the PNP has highlighted in their shadow cabinet. So all these new areas are additional sub-portfolios added to the main portfolios. It's now going to force the government now to address some of these issues that the PNP has called them to address. As I said before, matters of early child education, participatory democracy, these are all things that would not necessarily the government talking about it currently, but they're now forced to address some of these things because of how the PNP has organized their shadow cabinet.
Will they necessarily be forced to necessarily address them, though? Because lots of times we don't necessarily hear from the shadow cabinet. That's been a criticism in the past.
Well, they never had a major voice. So in terms of a platform or a forum for them to have a voice, many of the major spokespersons, as I mentioned earlier, they never had a seat in parliament. No, the PNP had to rely heavily on the 14 persons with seats in parliament. And at the end of the day, they also suffered from absenteeism in the sense of even though they had 14, they still suffered from persons not showing up in parliament in terms of adding a voice to the discussion. So what they do have now is a larger group in the lower house, in addition to their 8 Senate members. So what they can benefit from is that their opposition spokesperson on the different functional areas and the deputy opposition spokespersons, they all have some voice in parliament, whether through the Senate or through the lower house, they can now contribute to the debate. So what will happen is that whenever bills are introduced, or whenever any sort of policies to be enacted in these areas, these parliamentarians will now have a platform to address some of these matters.
And I want to come back a little bit more on that, Andrew McDaniel, and we have a quick break to take though before we get to that. We're talking about the new shadow cabinet named by the opposition People's National Party this morning and getting reactions to that. Stay with us here on Lead Story.
Ready to take flight. It's Aviation Expo 2025 in collaboration with the Airports Authority of Jamaica and the Jamaica Civil Aviation Authority, the island's ultimate aviation showcase and family fun day. Join us Saturday, October 4 from 12 to 8 p.m. at Tinson Penn Aerodrome in Kingston with show host Ian I.T. Ellis. And guess what? It's free. Plus, the JCAA and JDF will be recruiting. Follow at Aviation Expo JA for updates.
It's time!
Welcome to High School Pitchside. We have another fascinating episode for you.
More matches, more big clashes.
Let's talk about some of the big rivalries coming up this week.
More of your favorite features.
And trust me, you won't fall asleep in this history class.
And of course, we always want to hear from you.
Hear from your alma mater's players and coaches in Team Talk.
You know we can't leave you out. So send us your messages on social media and watch us react on FanView.
And you know we love a good little debate, right, Gio?
We've got you covered all season long on High School Pitchside.
High School Pitchside, your ultimate guide to all things schoolboy football, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
Welcome back to Lead Story here on CVM TV. I'm Giovanni Dennis. We're speaking, getting reactions to the People's National Party's shadow cabinet named this morning. With us, the president of the UTech Debating Society and Public Speaking Society, Dakar Diageo Nelson, and Andrew McDaniel, political commentator. Mr. McDaniel, before the break, you were speaking about some of the legislative issues that the now parliamentarians in the People's National Party will be able to speak on in Parliament that perhaps they weren't able to, well, not perhaps, that weren't able to speak about before, and what you're expecting of them to give them a little bit more teeth this time around. You were making the point about legislatively speaking in Parliament.
Yeah, so the point I was making is that before, the opposition spokespersons that were selected in the last term, they had to rely heavily on traditional media and in many ways new media to get their points across in terms of advocacy. And of course, the People's National Party has been critical of certain traditional media outlets in terms of not carrying the voices of their members. So they had to rely too much on the media in the last term. But now they have a seat in Parliament. They have the platform. They have a forum for them to voice some of these issues that they were currently raising. So when I think about issues such as Damien Crawford always mentioning the matter of education, CSEC passes. He did so, of course, in the Senate, but he relied heavily on new media and the political platform. Now he has a seat in the lower house. So when it is that bills are being drafted surrounding education, or whenever it is that the government wants to enact some sort of educational policy in their cabinet, he now has a voice in one of our central government bodies so that he can present some of the issues and concerns that he might have on a public platform. And as I said, most persons pay attention to parliamentary sittings than they do for the upper house as well. That's something that's known. Most persons will pay attention to the lower house sittings. So now that they have a seat in the lower house, it now gives them more bite, as you would say, for them to address some of these concerns that they had in the past.
I want to bring in Mr. Nelson on this point as well, because Damien Crawford for education, youth development, and he also spoke about Isaac Buchanan for youth as well. Mr. Nelson, what are some of the issues you want to hear addressed by these spokespersons now, given that you're a youth leader yourself? I mean, I know you're also you were a youth parliamentarian in 2023 as well.
Yeah, so I agree with what was said earlier. To some extent, I'll probably get onto that in a bit. But in terms of addressing the youth, obviously it is getting more youth engagement in terms of addressing, getting counter policies to some of the things that government might put forward. Because, obviously sometimes the government will put forward policies that not all youths will agree with. So them interacting more with us, I'm looking more specifically on things like the nutritional policy, the educational policies in terms of getting the grades back up, something that Mr. Crawford was quite adamant about during his time as in the Senate. But even piggybacking onto what was said earlier in terms of the 36, the size of the cabinet, I do agree that having 36 is good for allowing diverse voices and that kind of stuff. But
isn't it too top heavy though, the cardio? Isn't it too top heavy? Because what this is saying is that basically if the PNP formed the government, everybody would be a minister or junior minister. And in the Westminster system, that's fundamentally problematic, because you don't have the backbenchers who would be the voice of the people representing purely their constituents, because everybody is now taken up with ministerial duties.
I agree. But and even that, let's address it as it is, that the saying that they're in opposition right now, right? I think one of the problems that you have, and it's internal, is that the more voices that you have, the harder it is to maintain the consistency in message. And that is something that the PNP has been challenged with in the past. For example, things like climate and energy, those things cut across things like transport, agriculture, housing, and finance. So if you have, like, say, 4 or 5 shadow spokespersons all commenting separately, what you do is you risk sending mixed signals about what the opposition's actual policy is. That then creates things like confusion, not just for the public, but also for our stakeholders. We're looking at our investors, the unions,